Mi happy Thomas mi kisam this big pill opportunity along this very important meeting to talk about the village of the future and the future of the village. Now, I'm going to present in just 3 sections. Before I do, some of the high-level concepts that are behind my thinking here. The emergence of national sovereignty has greatly diminished local sovereignty. The Pacific peoples, particularly in Melanesia, were sovereign at village level, at communal level, made decisions about where to live, when to work, what to make. And in the modern world, these are all subject to regulation. The second part of this high-level concern is that with our new notions of the public sector and government and bureaucracy, we've diminished the role of society to do its own work. In other words, we expect public servants to do things. Why isn't the road built? Oh, because the government hasn't come and built it. But 100 years ago, the government didn't build the road. So there's a disempowerment there at the village level in particular. Now, there are some happy villages in the Pacific, but there are many villages that are under significant stress. And this is due to lack of services and meeting of aspirations. And often the village is full of the people who are left behind, and everybody else has gone to town. But I think that the future of the village is intertwined with the future of the town. So in the past, I've always been looking at the town, the urban area. But I slowly realised that everybody lives locally. And half of the Pacific people live in villages. In Papua New Guinea, it's more over 80% are living in villages and settlements. So these two topics of the urban development and the rural development go together. And we, interested in local government of the Pacific, must look at both the urban and the rural. So, the first question is, and all I wanted to do today was plant this question. I don't have any answers. I just want to put this on the agenda. What is the vision for the village of the future in the Pacific? And the reason this is important is that if we don't have a vision, who wants to live there? If I'm a young man or young woman and I'm in a village and I say, what's it going to be like in 30 years' time? If I have no positive view of it, why would I want my children to be there? So the vision of the future of the village is linked to the problem of urbanisation. And I think the challenge is to create that positive vision and fulfilment of it in ways that people are happy to maintain traditional lifestyles and not necessarily come to town looking for that fulfilment. So who has a vision for the future of the village, and what does it include? And that's my question. And I want you to answer it. Who in government is looking at it? And when I travel, I ask, now, which government department is looking at the future of the village? Whose responsibility is that? Because I know we're looking at urban growth and urban development and urban coordination and urban infrastructure and the problems of urban housing, and that's all necessary. But who's looking at village structure, village infrastructure, village service provision? So this is the first part of my presentation, it's just the question. What is the vision future? And the second part is the context of my question. Now the context is that in the 20th century, we've emphasised state building, the Pacific nations, national independence. And to do that, to build the Pacific nations, we've had to build the infrastructure, the human infrastructure, all the machinery of government, the physical machinery of getting the Pacific cities, of which there are very few, the Pacific towns, of which there are more, the financial services, the transportation, communications. This has all been necessary for nation building. But my point here And the reason I want to talk about the village at this conference was that that change and growth has been urban-centred and not rural, and that the concept of the modern village is underdeveloped. When we think village, we think tradition, we think old. I want us to think village modern, village future. And in fact, we know that there are some Pacific villages that are urban. Not all Pacific villages are rural. So we have to change some thinking. Now, when I say the concept of the Pacific village is underdeveloped, in a sense, the Pacific village is taken for granted. Oh, it just exists. It's always been there. But if you ask and I ask my friends, what is the definition of a village? You may see one, but the interesting thing is that when census enumerators go around, they have to ask the question, is this a village? Because it might be just a small collection of people in a hamlet, or they're on their own land, but what's a village? And is it important? And so this question of what is the role of the village and what is the role of the structure in the future just needs to be discussed more. Villages can be urban. This view of the yacht club at Port Moresby looking over Poraparina village, and I like this because you've got sort of the fruits of modern capital and wealth in the yacht club, and then you've got traditional village, and then you've got some tanks at the back. And I like this story because there was one very hot day where the traditional lighting of fires to burn off the grass was threatening those oil tanks over there. Now, this table needs to be updated, but what we tried to do, not all Pacific countries here, but a number of them, was to ask how many provinces, that's easy to find out, how many districts, that's easy, how many cities. Well, this chart might be old, but you see that for some countries there's only two. I think Fiji's got 3 cities now. I think there was a third one declared. Cities and towns. What is the definition of a city? What is the definition of a town? But those questions just leading into what is the definition of a village, all right? And so when we look at this chart, I don't have a point here, but what we know clearly is that while we understand how many districts there are, how many provinces, that's clear, how many cities, they are growing, but there's not many Pacific cities. But there are more Pacific towns, and we know that Papua New Guinea has at least 50 towns, and that's a really important topic for this country. But how many villages? Now, for some countries, it's not important. But it's interesting, for the Polynesian villages, if you ask Samoans, I think it's now 248, the answer was, how many villages are there in Samoa? The answer was, well, do you mean official villages or unofficial? And I think the answer was 248. You can correct me if... But the number of villages is known, the boundaries are known, the traditions are known. That's a Samoan, Polynesian environment of the village. Tonga, roughly 167, but there are some unofficial ones that have crept up as well. Now, Papua New Guinea, I've had a guess there, 15,000. I don't know. Solomons, I'm having a guess at 5,000 villages. I don't know. I've seen reports of 4,000, so I added some more to it. Vanuatu, I've got a figure there, 2,140. It's an old figure, it'll be updated now. But the census data trying to find out how many villages there are. But look, even if my numbers are not correct, you've got 24,000 villages in the Pacific and more as entities. These are collectives of communities who live their lives there. 24,000 minimum compared to 144 districts or 6 to 10 cities in the Pacific that are all trying to have a network and see what it is to be a city. And I'm also interested in, at the Pacific Urban Forum in Nandi, I talked about the vision of the city. So this time I'm talking about the vision of the village. Because the city also needs a vision of where it's going, what it's going to be. Because in the Pacific, they come out of specific traditions. The Pacific cities were administrative centres, not centres of life and culture and well-being, but just places where you go to do your banking and buy some shopping and that sort of thing. So there's need for vision there as well. So the point I'm making here is that there are very, very many villages, and sometimes the number isn't known, sometimes the definition is not clear, and then there's the question of does it matter? So the second part of the context is that there is a legal and constitutional framework in which this question might be important. Now, the cities and the towns are new. Therefore, they had to be articulated. What is a city? And define it, make an act. A town, make an act. A town has these characteristics. It gets this type of revenue from the state, or doesn't get it, as the case may be, because there's so little transfer in the Pacific. But the villages, because they were customary entities, haven't been defined in modern law. And it's interesting, when you look at the constitutions of the Pacific states, they will refer to the village without defining it. But when they set up a village court, they will define it, because the court's new. So anything that's customary just exists. It's just taken for granted. And the laws will say, we will allow for things to happen at village level. But it does not explain what a village is. And so as the urban areas hit on with the peri-urban and the village, this question of what is a village will become important. Because then when you ask, how are resources getting to villages? How is village decision-making having an impact on other aspects of modern government? I think it's an underexplored area. It changes by country. Now, so the third part of this is that local government in PICs has become synonymous with local urban. And I just wanted to make the point that it's equally local rural. Because everybody lives locally, and in the Pacific, half those people live in rural areas. Now, I'm asking this question legally, constitutionally, what is a village? Is it a geographic area? Well, villages usually are on customary land, but we know in settlements in Port Moresby, communities have come in and in a sense made a village on the land they're settled informally. Are they a village now? They're not on their customary land, but so is it geographic, or is it something else to do with human communities? Because, for example, one of my Fijian friends in answering this said, well, a village is a place where you have a church and you have a meeting place and you have certain relations between people. So the idea of the village is not to do with land and geography, but to do with social relations. And that's an interesting, different concept. So that whole group of people might move somewhere else and still be a village, because it's a communal relationship that is important to the village. Now, Melanesia is different, because the concept of one of my correspondents in Melanesia, when I asked this question, said, well, a village doesn't matter to me, we live in hamlets. We're much more distributed. We don't all live together like some other people. We all take our own little space, and just 2 or 3 families will live together, and we do our own thing, very, very segmented. So hamlets are also important here. So this question comes to every census when you go out and ask the question, what's a village? And I picked this up from the 2009 census for Vanuatu that had to define for the census numerators. You'll know when you get to a village because it has a meeting space, has a dispensary, maybe has a church. Therefore, you have a village. So definition by functions, not by geography, but by what services are provided there. Now, just a little on this idea of getting data. At provincial level, this is the case of the National Economic and Fiscal Commission for Papua New Guinea, which really does admirable work in working out what are the resources that go to a provincial level. But the stress is at the local level. Now, there are reports, there's been a study of the DSIP funds, hasn't been made widely available, but that will give an idea of a district level distribution of resources to see how they're meeting service needs. But this still doesn't tell the story of service provision at village level. And I think there's a lot of work can be done. You can't do all of them, but to find out what services are reaching the village. Because I know you can get national GDP, you can get provincial allocations, but to understand how villages are coping, I think is a study in itself. So this is the context. I've said that there's a legal context, and what I've said in that section is that in the contemporary law, the urban spaces have been delineated, their responsibilities, their powers, their organisation. But when you get outside of those modern urban spaces and get to the village, it's not articulated in law. So that's custom. That's under chiefly authority, or St. Solomon's is under the provincial government, but they do whatever they like. And in that unregulated space, we don't know, this is a research colloquium, we don't know what's happening in those villages. You may know anecdotally from your experience, but there's nothing gathered to understand how the village is doing, and certainly where it's going. So the third part is some responses, some of my thoughts on where to go. The first is we need to clarify the meaning of village in diverse settings. By that I mean, what is it in Micronesia? What is it in Polynesia? In some of the small states in Micronesia, the island constitutes the community, and this question doesn't really, we don't really have villages, we just have the island community. What are you talking about? But in Polynesia, the village is important, but is it constraining? Is it liberating? How is it working now? And then in Melanesia, I think it's a critical decision, because so many people are living in villages. So what does it mean? Is it geographic? Is it a cultural space? Is it a political space? Is it a spiritual space? Linguistic? Now, another interesting thing about the village is that it's not like a town. The town has public spaces. There are roads that we can all walk down in a town. A visitor can come to town. A tourist can come to town. But a village is not a public space. It's communally owned. It's a collective private space. It's very different in terms of interaction with the public, the wider public, with visitors. And these types of things are not fully understood, what we mean by sort of common spaces in villages as compared to towns. Now the second is that we need to ensure that local government evolves throughout countries, both rural and urban, I've made that point, in accordance with local culture and aspiration, not just an imposition of models for local government, but to make sure that they meet local aspirations as well. Now, in this point, I'm coming back to what I said at the beginning, that my view of Melanesia in particular is that the village was sovereign. It could make decisions on where to live, when to plant, when to travel, when to work, when to play, and that's all been lost. And so, in a sense, there's a bit of reclaiming some sovereignty at local level, I think, is part of this project. And the third is to articulate a vision for the Pacific Village. What are the diverse visions that exist? And maybe there are some, so bring them forward and let's see what people are thinking about that. Now, whatever that vision is, it should include a high level of autonomy to reclaim that traditional view. And this is a big challenge, because if you don't have a high level of autonomy, you've got a high level of dependency. And this is the last thing that any government needs in any country, let alone the Pacific, is to have the local communities fully dependent on planning and decision making and implementation by national levels or provincial levels. They can't cope. You've got 25,000 villages all pulling on the national government to make decisions or send down resources. The more independence that can be created, the more resilience you've got at local level, the more ability to make decisions. So it's really an important point. And the last one there is the need for experimentation. There are some model villages around. You know, in Fiji there's Koroi Pita, which is with the Rotary Project, to create a new village environment out of nothing. It's not a traditional village, created a village, look at the housing, look at the sustainability, look at the energy, look at the decision-making structures, empowering women in that village. It's a wonder, and I could have put some slides up, but Vitelli in up here as a non-traditional village, an experiment. There might be others as well. So what's the experimentation that's going on? So I'm going to make 3 points to conclude. And following on from Dr. Carl Wright, his reminder that we are now getting into a post-2015 development space. We need to link the future, talk about the village, to that global development agenda as well. This is the points that I'm making in this presentation. The first is that local government is both rural and urban. The second is to need to enhance the voice of grassroots. I have another chart that I published in another paper, which looks at the decision-making levels in the Pacific. You've got your global agencies, your UNs, WTO, World Health, putting very good policy based on global learning. That's one policy influence in the Pacific. And then you've got your regional agencies, like ADB and others, that based on all their knowledge, their surveillance, they understand what's going on, they put in strong recommendations. And then you have the crop agencies, all putting in that translation of those down into regional plans. All the crop agencies, SPC, and the Foreign Secretariat, and the Environmental Program, and all the others, they also have their regional plans that they're supporting. And then you have national development plans, where the national governments in the capitals are setting out their vision for the country. And then you might have some provinces that have a provincial plan. And so I'm asking today, where is the village? What is left to decide? Who can decide anything after all these levels of plan? And this is called top-down. And the task is that it meets bottom-up. Now, you can't have all bottom-up planning because you need all that global knowledge. But there's got to be this dialogue between the two. So that's what I'm talking about today. So I look forward to a future research seminar, 2 to 3 days in length, at which we can look in more detail at this topic of the village of the future and the future of the village. Thank you.